Hello, and welcome to the Bible and Beyond podcast from Early Christian Texts. We explore historical and spiritual questions about Jesus, gender, women, salvation, healing, and the meaning of life. Shirley Paulson is hosting a series of conversations with scholars who are able to unlock mysteries from extra-canonical books, forgotten scriptures, so-called Gnostic Gospels, and the Bible. Thanks to a generous AAR, Loose Advancing Public Scholarship grant, we are now offering a completely free online course titled Introducing Nag Hammadi and Related Texts. In 24 video lectures, you'll gain a fundamental understanding of recently discovered texts written by early Jesus followers. Just visit bibleandbeyond.courses to enroll. And now, here's Shirley Paulson.
I heard about a new course that Bart Ehrman is teaching on the earliest Christian heresies. Well, that's a subject that always intrigues me. So I had a chance to interview Bart and ask him some questions about Christian heresies. I thought you'd be interested in hearing the interview. So I'm really interested in the topic of your course because I didn't even know that I was a heretic myself until I went to seminary, and my fellow seminarians told me so. So I guess I'm really interested in getting to know my ancient heretical cousins. So we've certainly inherited a lot more information from the rivals who won all the battles, but I'd like to know, do you have some information about the lives and the thinking of the people on the other side of the story?
We don't have very much information about their lives. We do in some instances. We have a lot more information about what they taught, both in terms of their beliefs, their practices, their ethics. Part of the problem is that for most of these various groups, we only have what their enemies say about them. and as we know, whether in politics or religion, if all you have is what the enemy's saying, it's not necessarily reliable. In some cases, though, we do have original documents, and part of my class, part of this course, will be talking about some of the original documents that support one view or another.
All right, fair enough. Okay, because I've certainly heard plenty of the other side too. So I'm just interested in what all you have got to say. So I'd like to know also, why was it such a life and death issue, whether people thought of Christ as human or divine? Why was that such a big deal?
So, Christianity was unique in the ancient world because it was the only religion that insisted that it was the only right one, and that if you didn't agree with the Christian faith, that you would be eternally punished. There weren't other religions like that. Judaism didn't think that. The Greek and Roman religions didn't think that. So Christianity was unique that way. But what it meant was that since you have to believe in Christianity, it also meant you had to believe in the right kind of Christianity. The truth is what would bring salvation. And if you didn't believe the right things about God, for their example, there are groups that thought there were two different gods. Some groups thought there are 12 gods. Christian groups said there are 36 gods. You have Christians who said that Jesus is human. Some said he was divine. Some said he's both. And so if you don't have it right, and the truth is what's going to bring you salvation, then, you're damned. And so it's because of the distinctive nature of Christianity being based on having a right belief.
That's so interesting. Why would a religion build that idea when others weren't doing that you have to be right and wrong?
Yeah, well, it's a good question because it's, as I said, it's a novelty. And most other people didn't understand it. The other religions were very tolerant. I mean, Greek and Roman religions, there are thousands of Greek and Roman religions. They were all polytheists. But partly because they're polytheists, you can worship whichever god you want. There are lots of gods out there. And so it wasn't like you had one thing. But the followers of Jesus were Jewish, and Jews themselves, had their own religion that they wanted to follow, but they didn't insist anybody else did. But when the Christians, after Jesus' death, they came to believe, based on their view of the resurrection, that his death is what brought salvation. And if his death is what brought salvation, then you've got to believe in his death. But it means you have to believe certain things. And in other religions, believing things just wasn't even an issue.
That leads me to my next question, actually. I'm kind of intrigued with the fact that the Orthodox traditions have inherited, that we've inherited, promote belief over understanding, and that their opponents, I think, tended to encourage understanding as the pathway to salvation. So I'm curious about why would striving for gnosis or understanding be so problematic?
So the main group that I think emphasized understanding were the Gnostics. And Gnosticism is kind of an umbrella term. There are lots of different Gnostic groups, just as there are lots of Christian groups today. There were lots of different Gnostic groups, but they all did emphasize gnosis, which roughly translates as knowledge, but it really means more like understanding knowledge. It isn't like knowing categorical facts. It's really kind of understanding things. And the Orthodox Christians agreed that you had to have gnosis. And there were early Christians who were Orthodox Christians who called themselves Gnostic, but it just meant they were the ones who understood. And so these other Gnostic groups were the ones who would insist that it's actually knowledge itself is what saves you, or this understanding is what saves you. It's not the death of Jesus, not atonement for sins. Jesus has revealed the truth that can allow you to escape this material world we're in to return to your spiritual existence. So you've got to know the truth, and Jesus is the one who reveals it.
Okay, so do other faith traditions have such a history of heresies? I mean, when you're talking about nobody else had this way of having the right and wrong, but I certainly know of different kinds of Jews and Muslims, Hindus and Buddhists. They didn't fight over heresies, did they? What is it about Christianity that invites heresy so easily?
Well, it does, and it's that many of us who grew up in the Christian tradition, I grew up in the Protestant tradition, and we would say creeds in church. We'd say the Nicene Creed, or you'd say the Apostles' Creed. And these are formulations of belief. There was nothing like that in other ancient religions. Judaism didn't have that. You didn't have to express a set of beliefs. And Roman and Greek religions they were about how you worshiped God. They weren't about what you believed about the gods. So once Christianity has that in place, that it really matters what you believe, then there are right beliefs and wrong beliefs. So the word heresy in ancient Greek just means choice. And it means that you've chosen to believe the wrong belief. And people who aren't heretics are orthodox, right? So orthodoxy means correct belief. And so the problem with these terms is everybody thinks they have the right beliefs. Right? If you thought you had the wrong beliefs, you change your beliefs to the right beliefs. So everybody, by definition, thinks they're orthodox. But when one group of Christians ended up dominating the Christian church and basically taking it over, they called themselves orthodox, and everything else they called heresies. And you're right; it's not. You do find it in other traditions now. I mean, in Islam, you have heresies. But Islam is after Christianity, and it's getting that from the Christian ideas. And in Judaism, you kind of have, but like most of religions today, they're not interested in heresy. They might think you're wrong, and they might think your practices are wrong and things, but it's not. It just isn't the same as within Christianity, where you have to get the details right.
And so that's so interesting that other people didn't care, and I want to know them who actually really cared so intensely about these things, since the relationship with gods in antiquity was so different from the way we think of religion now. I feel like Jesus was positioned more as an alternative kingdom to the emperor. So then when Constantine took over, he solidified the power. So for whom was it important to establish this trinity in its opposition? Was it the people in their homes, or was it a power play, or everybody? Who cared?
So unfortunately, we don't know about the people in the homes or the people on the street. We don't have records from them, because the only records we have from the ancient world are by the literary elite, either by them or for them. And so we only know what they thought and what they said about other people, which means about the other 99% of the world. So we don't have enough to go on, really. But the people who did care were the ones who thought that, who were firmly committed to believing that Christ is the way of salvation, and he's the only way of salvation. It's the exclusivity of Christianity that makes it doctrinal like this. This is the only way. If it's the only way, you got to know the way. You got to know the path. And so you start, you start getting this insistence on right belief and wrong belief already in the New Testament. In Paul is our earliest writer of the New Testament, and when he writes his letters, in most of his letters, he's opposed to other Christians who have other beliefs from his, and he attacks them. Um, and so it starts early on, but then it gains over time. When you get to the time of Constantine, is when you get the Nicene Creed formulated at the Council of Nicaea. Constantine himself actually didn't much care. He was a Christian. I'm sure he actually did convert to Christianity, but he thought this is like the difference between these two sides he thought were so trivial, but they weren't trivial. They ended up making a big difference.
Well, I guess that's what keeps eating away at me is that, okay, if Constantine really didn't care that much and he had all the power and we don't know about the people in their homes, I get a feeling that somebody in a household, the whole household has to go one way or another. So it's not up to an individual belief, but it's like, we believe this because we're being saved together or something like that.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Yeah, so Constantine didn't care about this particular issue that he thought was the issue. The issue had to do with whether Christ had always existed and was equal with God, or if he had come into existence at some point before the universe came into existence, and was a subordinate divinity. Is he completely equal or is he subordinate? And Constantine thought, who cares? He's God. It doesn't matter. The two parties really thought that it did matter, and so they did fight it out. But the reason Constantine cared about it enough to call the Council of Nicaea was because he saw the church as a unifying force in his empire, which was very fragmented. And I don't think he converted. I think he really converted. I think he was genuinely a Christian, but he did see the value of having a unified religion, culturally uniting his empire. And now it's divided over this issue. And so, and he thinks, wow, I don't care what you just solve this thing, will you? And so it was really, I think his concern was for that. For most theologians, though, they really thought that this is an important issue. And if you don't get this right, who Christ is, how can you possibly believe in Christ? You don't know, you're believing in the wrong Christ. And so it mattered.
It's just so interesting. And I also can't help but hear the hierarchical, patriarchal influences in here. There appear to be so many more women involved in the heretical or extra canonical writings. Were these women who were heretics maybe in the same household with powerful husbands? I keep going back to the household thing, but the women were in the other voices, weren't they?
Well, they weren't so there are lots of debates about women in early Christianity. A lot of scholars have spent a lot of time working it out. It looks like in the earliest period of Christianity, women were more involved in the churches than as time went on. The churches of Paul, for example, women are pretty involved, pretty active. But as time goes on, women's voices get silenced. That happens regularly all the time. And one theory is that some of these other alternative religions allowed a greater voice for women. And so there's a question about whether within Gnosticism, since Gnosticism is stressing the importance of correct understanding, is it possible that women, of course, I mean, women can know as much as men, and so is it possible that in Gnostic circles women were more active, and it certainly is possible. In other Christian groups ended up being called heretics, women had very little to say. There were groups of Jewish Christians who maintained their Judaism, and in those circles, it doesn't look like women had a lot of say. But there were other groups. There's a group called the Montanists in the 2nd century that based their beliefs not so much on written texts, but on prophecies that God gave people. And 2 of the 3 leaders were women. And so there were alternatives that appear to have been attracted to some women more.
Well, I want to say I thank you so much for doing this course because I feel like it's a service to the world to be able to think more broadly and more openly about what was going on then so we can think more broadly now. So my kudos to you for this course. I'm proud of you for doing it.
Well, thanks. That is one of the reasons I'm really interested in the diversity of early Christianity because, it helps us be more tolerant of the other when you start seeing how diverse it really originally was.
Yeah. Well, I'm so grateful for that. Thank you so much. Great to talk to you.
Great talking to you. Thanks.
Thank you, listeners, for being with us today. Be sure to check out the details from this episode by accessing the show notes on our website, earlychristiantext.com/podcasts. Or just come browse around the website to find loads of other content, including blog posts, articles, online courses, our monthly discussion series, and more. We hope you'll consider supporting the work of producing online resources related to the incredible records left behind by the earliest followers of Jesus. You can become a supporting member by joining our Patreon community at patreon.com/Bible and Beyond. We love hearing from you on social media. Find us on Facebook, X, and YouTube by searching for Early Christian Texts. We'll catch you on our next episode of the Bible and Beyond podcast.